Hi, we're live. Is it working?
Think so.
We haven't done one of these for a long time. Let me just double check we're live. Um, duh, duh, duh. I wonder if anyone. Let me see.
Yeah, I think we're live. Yeah.
We're live. Okay, great. So I thought we've done a spontaneous little session. We haven't done any of these for a long time because we've just been overrun, and well, me specifically, I was very overrun. But since so much is going on and there are so many questions, and once again, the entire consensus is on the same page, and there's very little diversity of comment in the main media space, I thought I would present the other perspective because that's what we do. That's the blind spot. We're not taking a ideological position. We just think it's important to always try and understand the other perspective, and there is another perspective. Obviously, the universal consensus is that everything Trump is doing with the tariffs is crazy. There's no logic to it, blah blah blah. But if you're curious to see the logic or what they are thinking, hang on and we'll discuss it here. I'm Isabella Kaminska, and Dario Garcia Ganer is joining me now from somewhere exotic, but we'll keep it on the down low where you are. How are you, Dario?
I'm good, Izzy. I'm good. I was a bit nervous when I woke up yesterday, which was my birthday
Oh,
on
happy birthday.
yeah, thank you. But and I just saw the red wall of stocks that everyone was posting on Wall Street Bets. But I didn't exactly wake up to it because I was just Asian stocks being open. So I guess, but so I had a lot of questions, and I was very happy that the only person that seemed to be giving an independent and different perspective was the lady I work with. So the first thing I want to ask is, what seems to have happened since? What has the reaction been in terms of markets? That's yeah.
So the markets are understandably down, but and if you look at the blind spot, I kind of preempted this. Like there are two posts that sit side by side. One is, the upcoming controlled demolition of Wall Street, and this is where we are now. But just to make everyone feel a little bit better, the teaser is it will shortly be followed by the next post I did, which is the Trump pump. So this is going to be painful, but that's by design, because the whole point, and I think there is one meme that really does the whole thing justice. There's a meme of Trump in front of a wall of red, Wall Street red, and it says, actually, I just posted it on Twitter. It says, "I don't always transfer massive wealth from rich boomers to young workers, but when I do, I shock the markets." And I think that is actually the like the best encapsulation of what's going on, and it's good to know that the average person gets it, because it is a wealth transfer. Because what we fundamentally needed weren't higher taxes, it was a wealth transfer, but people are very, in America it's incredibly taboo to tax wealth. And you have to do it in some sort of meritocratic way and conceptual way that won't necessarily be bypassed by an upset Congress, right? So, or blocked rather. So this is the way they've done it, and there is logic to it. The idea really is that the last 20 years or so, the conglomerates have taken over the system, and the conglomerates, this is where the Trump side and the Democrat side should, in theory, be on the same page
Hmm.
in terms of antitrust and kind of killing off these big conglomerates. And they are getting too big. They're massive, and these oligarchs are, accountable to nobody. They're almost their own sovereign state, and if it was to continue on this way, we would be subject to like a kind of stateless new global power base with very little like protection for our own sovereignty and our own rights. So the idea here is really to transfer wealth from the people who've been profiting from the you know creation of these conglomerates, and back to Main Street. And also, the ultimate objective is to create a new American Mittelstand. Mittelstand is obviously the German equivalent, the small and medium-sized sector, and allow everybody to have a stake in their own sovereignty. The statistic that I keep hearing is, as it stands, something like 10% of the people in America are responsible for 50% of the consumption, with the other 50% funded by federal deficits. That is not a sustainable system, and the way things were going, it was going to get to 8%, and then until like there can be only one. So now, maybe ask me another question, but I'll just finish that line off by saying, what's happening in China is also very important, because China is kind of the root cause of that. And as far as the Trump administration goes, I do think that China, they market forces will eventually do their thing. It's just a question of whether you wait until they do their thing and it's really a chaotic, just like global collapse, or do you nudge them and bring it down in a controlled demolition and force the hand of China to do things a bit earlier than it otherwise would be forced to do via market forces.
So that's the first question that comes to mind, and I have to apologize if it's a newbie question, but it's a very basic question, and that's just, what are the specifics on what comes to mind is, how specifically does crashing the market help the average American?
Quite a lot. I mean, so basically this is, and I love the timing, because we're coming up to Palm Sunday, which is like biblically known for being the time when Jesus threw the moneylenders out of the temple, and the moneylenders really represent the rentier, the person who draws rent from the system risk-free. Very different to get rents or dividends in terms of actually taking risk and putting putting a stake in something that could go the wrong way, versus a sort of guaranteed like zero risk return, which is just rent. I mean, it's ironic that it should be arguably the world's best known rent extractor, who comes from the world of real estate, doing this. But even Trump would say, real estate does come with risk, so it's not riskless to draw rents if you're responsible for building the buildings that you are then renting, right? So you're creating value. Now, so it is a transfer of wealth that should, in theory, eliminate the rent-seeking element. And this is also why today banks are down quite intensely, because the message is finally coming home that, we're going back to a low-rate environment. It's by design. And in a low-rate environment, banks do not do well because they are the ultimate rent seekers. So when the banks and the conglomerates are not, taking the rents, then you naturally the equilibrium is restored, and you benefit the working classes, because the labor starts to have more power than capital. But it's not just about labor versus capital. It's about capital distribution, because it's about giving everyone the opportunity to be a capital owner. Go on, ask me more questions.
The other, since when? Because I saw on your Twitter you put a lot of, for example, Nancy Pelosi, right, talking in the 90s about the upsides of was it tariffs and stuff like that, or of some kind of protection for
that's
the vulnerable?
One of the ironies is that these ideas are not new, and for a long time it was the Democrats who would be pushing these sorts of ideas. I mean, this is just in terms of the face swapping that is going on between the Democrats and the Republicans. Like, so the Democrats and certainly just generally the left has become sort of captured by these very conservative and authoritarian like mechanisms. Meanwhile, the former conservatives and Republicans have become these counterculture radicals. It's all very weird, and it's a face swap. So I would say that it is probably a natural I mean, what's interesting is that they've just so forgotten what they used to say, and they don't see any kind of like problem with their inconsistency. On the other hand, if you see the clips of Trump on Oprah in around the same era, there is a remarkable consistency to what he's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
saying. And this is
Trump's
where I
incredibly
think this
consistent.
idea that he's like a madman, he is a madman, but he's also um arguably the most consistent madman there
Mm,
is. I say, like,
yeah.
you know, he has been saying the same thing for 30 years. Maybe not in his own words, maybe he had a
Mm,
ghostwriter, but whatever.
mm,
But he's had the same message, and people who criticize him often never read his stuff. And he's written, he's published at least 20, 30 books where he's spelled out all his views on this. And
mm,
yeah, and remember, he is the grand, master, in the sense that, he had a show called The Apprentice, right? So his whole life brand is about empowering young entrepreneurs, allowing them to go have a pathway to becoming business owners, and being accountable and taking risk. And it's a meritocracy
mm,
kind of
mm,
mindset. And this is where I think, this is what he's doing. The golden age that they're talking about is going to be this new economy. And that's why also the economists are failing to address that these tariffs are geared towards a new economy. And the new economy is going to be very different to the old economy, where persistent trade surpluses and deficits were tolerable. Although it's just
mm.
hilarious to see loads of economists trying to argue in favor of persistent trade imbalances, when even like 10-15 years ago they would have argued against it.
And the fact that European elites have been going on about strategic autonomy for the past 3 weeks since the Trump Zelensky spat, right? And now suddenly the idea that America is seeking its own economic and strategic independence is somehow, the world's worst thing, when actually it's become exceedingly clear in the post-COVID era that uh, you can't just govern a country according to economics alone. That economics is always within the context of strategy and autonomy, and the nation state is its own thing. And it's critical to have manufacturing in your country. It's critical to have some level of self-sufficiency. It doesn't mean we should be seeking autarky, but there were certainly a lot of good to bringing important and critical sectors back home. And so it was just very surprising that after Europe having realized this for the past 2 or 3 weeks, talking about bringing weapons contracts back to Europe and all of this, that we're just outraged again. Yeah. Also, it looks
uh
like I'm crying with with like my eyes are red or something. I'm not.
no, no.
I'm not sad.
um no, look, you're right, and I think strategic autonomy is key. Look, so another little appreciated point here is that, really, again, what the Trump administration is trying to achieve here is they're actually trying to create a European Union type model under its original vision, right? So their belief is that you know they represent the free world, whereas everyone else has sort of bowed to the forces of authoritarianism and interventionism, industrial policy, whatever. And actually, let's go back. The famous chart, the chart that he showed with the non-tariff,
Yeah.
like what they charge us, what we're going to
Yeah.
charge them. And people are disputing the formula. They're saying it's nonsensical. Of course, there are two components to that formula. One is, rather than, there are two types of tariffs. There are obvious tariffs, what you tax at the border, but then there's
Mhm.
non-tariff based barriers, which are things like domestic financial repression, currency manipulation, regulatory hurdles, discrimination,
Mhm.
etc. Blah blah blah.
Mhm.
So that's really difficult to calculate. So what they've basically done is they've looked at the overall net surplus deficit, and they've kind of like figured out what percentage of that is related to American exports, and then they've set a percentage figure because they believe that's where
Mhm.
the asymmetry in the market is. And people are laughing at that because Olivier Blanchard, for example, who's a famous economist, said, there's nothing wrong with imbalances. Like, imbalances are fine. I have an imbalance with my grocer because I, owe him and I get his goods, but then I counter that with whatever job I do. Right? We all have imbalances in life, and that is right, and it's true. But there is a difference between, wanting to have perpetual persistent imbalances and ones that continuously adjust, even in that grocer consumer relationship. If there's suddenly too many grocers, right, producing too many vegetables, that like maintaining that persistent imbalance would be wrong and stupid, because there would be a misallocation of capital in the system. And something has to nudge, right? You can't just create incentives to make endless amounts of grocers at the same time that other people, at the cost of other jobs, right? So
Mm.
it's not actually, I think, a logical explanation. Eventually, you do need to have a correction. And what really Trump is doing with this formula is that he's looking towards a new era of a new economy where industrial manufacturing is no longer as full of friction as it used to be. Because back in the day, when it took years to build factories, and you had cumbersome and expensive capital expenditure to do it, and you needed extreme complexity in supply chains, labor forces, etc. Obviously, you didn't want to have like trade. You wanted to get some return on that capital invested, which meant it made sense to do protectionism to allow for the payoff effectively in the long run, even if it meant even if somebody else then produced a more efficient factory somewhere else,
Yeah.
that you might not get a return on capital, therefore protect. That makes sense, and there was a certain logic to that comparative advantage. But these days, that's not the case, because really labor, even in the last 10 years, I think labor itself has become a comparative advantage, which is in this case cheap labor. So what we've been doing to allow for this protectionism is we've been holding those people down. We've been repressing China, not allowing it to go up the value chain as much as it could, but like resisting the formation of a proper middle class there, precisely so that we can maintain the edge with cheap labor. But that is going away, and even China, as it automates, this is why I say it's a controlled demolition of forces that is coming anyway. As they automate, inevitably all those workforces will have to be let go, and China will have to allow the consumer to be released, and then the imbalances will square up anyway. But they don't want it to happen in a shock way. They need to do it, in a controlled way. So the point is, now you can put your factory anywhere, and it doesn't make, it's not going to be the labor side of things that's going to determine whether it makes money or not. What you need is proximity to your demand point, or proximity to your energy source, right? And if your energy source is at your demand point, well, then obviously it makes sense to have like more of a decentralized factory system, which is owned actually by the local people who manage it, because then you compete not on the commoditization of products, but on the kind of cultural aspects of so every single community, based on their cultural quirks, will create different products, and that will allow for
Yeah.
diversity and continuing trade, and general kind of purpose in life. But
And it's
Dario,
never been
you
more.
should know this better than
Yeah.
anyone, because you are one of these people who is moving
Yeah.
into manufacturing. You yourself are starting a manufacturing business, right, in Spain?
Exactly. Exactly. And it was one of the first things that came to mind when I heard of the Trump tariffs. Was I did a quick mental calculation on how much would it cost to build a little manufacturing outpost in the United States. And the truth is, it's never been cheaper, because, like you say, it's no longer about, how cheap of a labor can I get, really, because now machinery has gotten so incredibly affordable that one high-skilled individual can manage a wide range of automated workers, which are either 3D printers, or soon, within the next 5 years, we will have robots that will be able to work in plants and work 24/7, and have one individual that can take care of several. But so another question that comes to mind, which is slightly differing from this topic, it's something that you mentioned yesterday when I was talking to you, which is that some countries will be forced to capitulate against Trump. What do you mean by that, and what does that
Well,
capitulation
I
look
mean,
like?
a lot of this is like an opening, you know, gambit. Like you don't, whether or not these, again, people are thinking these are permanent tariffs. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to prompt adjustments and change, right? So if the counterparts concede or capitulate, then the tariff will come down. And that's why the future of tariffs under the new era, under the new economy, is going to be more dynamic. They're going to be dynamic tariffs that respond in real time to how the counterparts are operating. And there will be times when surpluses emerge, because we cannot prevent force majeure, acts of God, like unexpected supply issues, weather, all that sort of stuff is going to keep happening. So occasionally you will have supply side disruptions that lead to big imbalances, right? But the system is going to have to be nimble. For me, it's like a human. We're creating a sort of organic human organism, right? Where the output, the spare output in the world, which is currently all coming out of like Asia and China, right? That's like the fat in the system. And the question is, where do you put the fat? Right, you want to distribute, you want to keep it somewhere. Like at the moment, America has been keeping the fat, right, because it's the currency of it's the consumer of last resort, right? And that's, I mean, it's not, this is probably a funny reflection that everyone's getting fat, and now we've got Ozempic, right, which doesn't work. But I am proof of that myself. But but the point is, they're like the fat, but they don't want to be just the fat, because actually the fat needs to go all around. And so now the question is like, where do you store it, and how do you distribute the fat, and when is there too much fat, and when do you have to cut it down? And actually the other thing is, in the new economy, the new determinant of what is of the balance of payments, I think, will be increasingly on the limitations to consumption, not on like endless consumption, or boundless consumption, because really the new thing will be access rights. So we will get, that's again, the tariffs are there like a dam that will go up and down to try and reallocate not liquidity anymore, but actually to repress demand when there is too much, because it's an abundant model effectively. And the last remaining scarcities are things like areas of its outstanding natural beauty. So you will have to put up, that makes sense, doing protectionism of that, and only allowing so many people in at any time, for example. So in an abundant economy, there will still be limitations. Like 8 billion people cannot all have a yacht and be at the Riviera. It's just not possible. But in exchange, countries will also limit, pollution. There are other limitations like pollution and processing of pollution. So now we will compete over who can process waste more efficiently and things like that. So it's just a different type of model, but we need those dynamic tariffs to ensure that the imbalances don't like over kind of develop in a specific region to cause a kind of cancer that then brings down the whole system. So unfortunately, as it stands, China has the biggest imbalance because it has been repressing its population to the point that they are equally enamored with the system. And that's why you have that lying flat phenomenon. They're not allowed to save. They have no security. There is no welfare. And that is mirrored on the American side by MAGA. Yeah, so this is all about addressing those factors.
Do you think so? I mean, I totally see the direction that Trump's tariffs are trying to take. The question, I guess, that remains is, will they manage to pull it off?
Well, this is the big question, but I would say people who are saying, oh, this is also stupid, they underestimate the team he has around him. he's got some real bullbusters on his team. I mean, Howard Lutnick is a bullbuster, and that man is a self-made man, and his life story is pretty amazing. You should read it. Read his bio. Also full of trauma, and someone who has overcome a lot. Meanwhile, Besant is obviously the man who brought down the Bank of England. And I think, you know, when the armchair pundit complex is going around, you know, pretending they know better than the man who literally understood the balance sheet of a sovereign nation to the point that he made ancestral wealth of multi-billion ancestral wealth family out of it, i.e. the Soros family. I think, you know, I know which side I would be more likely to listen to. I mean, Besant isn't a man who doesn't understand how sovereign balance sheets work, right? He does. His whole bet was that the UK was running on empty and had the ERM mechanism was misvalued relative to what the strength of the UK economy really was. And when he was pushed on it and put under pressure to back down, that maybe he was wrong, he doubled down. So I don't think he's I don't think he's Liz Truss. I don't think he will buckle the way Liz Truss did, because I think he's been under that pressure before.
And I guess if there's one thing to Trump's consistency is that we know he's not just he can't really throw in the towel on this issue, which is his number one issue, even more so than pulling America out.
And that goes back to the consistency point, because
yeah.
if you're a flip-floppy politician who's changing your position all your time, then you will cave. But Trump's entire brand is centered
on this
on
whole thing. And so, this is like the number one thing, even more than American isolationism. And speaking of American isolationism, it's not really isolationism, but it's more isolationist than the previous generation of American presidents, right? Especially with regards to Europe and overseas commitments. It reminds me of when the first Trump presidency started, and he started with this idea of, you know, telling Germany to up its NATO, its defense spending, and all these European countries, and how even though the plan had admirers before it was put in place, when the drama started, the online pundit land commentariat lost its nerve, and everyone basically just shat on the idea, even though during the Biden administration largely held up to Trump's gradual pullback of away from global responsibilities. So the Biden administration very much kept that going, and I think that, in my very limited understanding, I'd like to ask you what you think. But it would make sense that this is one of these victories that Trump inaugurates that becomes a bipartisan policy point going forwards.
I mean, I maybe I've missed your point.
Do you think this is one of these strategies that, just like the pulling back from global responsibilities, the Biden administration mostly kept going, not fully, but mostly kept going? Is Trump's tariff policy going to be something the future Democrats and Republicans are going to keep going?
Okay, no, I understand. As in, like, Trump started
that's very important, right?
China,
is this going to be a long-term thing,
Biden
or is
never unwound it, and then nobody moaned about it when Biden was doing it. Yeah, fair enough. So so I think there's some interesting, you know, for one thing, Biden did IRA, right, Inflation Reduction Act. And this was a non-tariff barrier. I mean, and the funny thing is, on the China, Asia, and European side, when IRA was announced, there was as much, like, you know, concern and you know, panic as there is about this. But in America, the whole thing was cheerleaded, even though it was direct intervention of a similar sort. It wasn't tariffs, but it was subsidization, which was, in theory, not like, you know, that wasn't a step back from what American sort of free market capitalism is supposed to be. So it was an entirely interventionist model, but it was focused on competing with China by becoming more like China, right? Whereas I think this is the difference between, and basically it was a mercantilistic zero-sum response. And I would say that is the difference here, is that Trump is trying to engineer a positive sum response, because he is doing shock therapy. That is what he's doing. This is the definitive shock therapy of our time. Like it makes what what happened in Russia almost, a walk in the park. But unlike shock therapy in Russia, he's ring fenced the American system so it can't be exploited, and the oligarchs can't go off and run off and extract capital, because actually they're the ones now being clipped. And unlike Russia, the in the last 10 years there's been a sort of training program for the MAGA base and for all the kind of working class young people with no jobs. It's been a secret training program, unlike, because remember, in Russia, when shock therapy happened, the reason the oligarchs were created is because the average man on the street had no idea of capital allocation, how to invest, how to put their money on, in anything. There was no muscle memory in terms of how to manage money, and that's why they didn't understand the value of the shares that they got, right? and they gave them away at discounted rates to the oligarchs. But we've had a secret training program for the last 10 years, which has been crypto. Crypto has made everyone into a trading fanatic. So the average young guy is now, the average young guy, risk-taking guy, is secretly a crypto fanatic, has been learning about all the tricks of the trade. It's been like a dry run. Crypto is a bit of a bullshit market, but think of it now as a simulation preparing them for the new big opportunity, which is turning those skills to now allocating real capital in the new economy. And the new economy isn't going to be about Wall Street. It's going to be about lots of decentralized exchanges focused on like investing in small community-based, projects and factories and manufacturing hubs, restaurants, whatever, but allocated by, financially literate young people who have been using crypto to realize how value is transferred and what makes money and what doesn't. I think really, that's what people are missing.
It's really interesting you say that, because I've been seeing these videos from this TikToker whose name now escapes me. She runs a VC, and she was saying that one of the biggest trends she's seeing on the VC floor, or shop floor, I don't know what the technical term is that interest is going away from companies that, from these tech companies that could promise huge monopoly rents once they take over a market, and in the meantime they're losing millions and millions and millions, and they're just burning through investor funds, towards these small teams in one place focused on one niche making money. And that there's a very clear shift going from let's burn money to get monopoly rents towards let's just invest in profitable companies. And
exactly.
that's what it's always been.
And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a ecosystem which is bringing risk-based capital investing back into vogue, right? And we're doing away with riskless rents. And that is what this is all about. Remember, over the last 20 years, cui bono from the pre-existing system? Well, it's like the shareholders of all these companies, these big conglomerates. Who are they? Like, a lot of them are like companies like, Vanguard, BlackRock, passive investment vehicles, and banks. Why? Because we, the pensioners, especially like the boomers, have completely withdrawn from active investing. They outsourced it all to these big custodians who have been taking advantage of that capital and pushing ESG strategy. ESG, whether you are aligned with those principles or not, the point is, if you're not active, you are, it's like allowing the mice to play whilst the cat's away. And so obviously, what will the big custodians of capital do? They'll do what's good for them, which is what's good for their management fees, which is putting the money in more and more rent mechanisms that can rent extract. Now, of course, this was a terrible, I would say, like from the, because some people might say these boomers that, they deserve their pensions, it's not their fault, blah blah blah. Look what's happened now. Trump's completely eroding their wealth. This is completely unfair. But I would say the boomers were negligent. They allowed this to happen on their watch. And it was due to their capital misallocation, the fact that they allowed these other companies to normalize processes that were bad for them domestically in the long run, that they should absolutely be punished for that, because it's 30 years of their policy that has brought us an American market which has, not enough young people, like too much, too many fat people, have broken like medical system, all these things have happened on their watch, right?
mm,
So
mm,
something went wrong there. Why should they get a payout for having badly
mm,
allocated capital? I don't think they should. Now, that
mm,
said, that doesn't mean we're going to wipe them out completely. What we want to do is engineer a new type of ESG trend. That's what's happening now. It's saying, well, we're going to clip you, but if you want to make the money back, whatever capital you have left, you have to rotate it back, but you now have to put it into the mega stocks. So you have to look at, like yesterday, which were the stocks that were gaining? It was Coca-Cola, Kraft, Heinz, I think T-Mobile. We're talking about American companies, McDonald's as well. So McDonald's, even though it is an international conglomerate to a certain degree, it's a franchise, which means it allows people to own their own companies. It's not a total. I mean, it does draw rents, but there is, this is not about killing returns on intellectual property. This is about not taking the piss and creating a conglomerates whose interest is to hold people down and not allow them to go up the wealth ladder, which is what, McDonald's actually does allow people to go up the wealth ladder, believe it or not, because it allows, you can, back in the day, you could start off working in McDonald's and work your way up the ladder to then eventually own your own franchise. And that was an entirely respectable pathway in life. Does that make sense? And the reverse ESG is a big part of the story, by the way, because now, how do you do ESG? Remember, ESG was a passive phenomenon. So it was about this kind of like bullying led by the civil society system to encourage corporates to do things that were not in their best interest in terms of profits, right? For ideological purposes. Now, the reverse ESG is about unwinding that. So it is ideological, but it's about ideological making profits actually count for something and actually be ends in their own, and ends in and of themselves. But how do you, all these new crypto people, you're going to have a lot of active investing is going to have to happen now. So how do you build that capital and how do you show where the money should go? This is where the Trump pump comes in, because after maybe, as soon as he cuts taxes, which will be the next phase. So pain now, but then in about 2 months' time, I don't know, I'm making these numbers up in my head, but like soon enough, you'll have that wave of investment that was promised from the soft banks and all those people coming into America. Then he will cut taxes on services and tips, and he will. Then people will have a bit more money, and this is when the Trump pump propaganda will start. And people laugh and they say he's a grifter and all that. Fine, but that's part of the point. Like, he is the top grifter, and if you do as he does, you'll make money. So he's like a Pied Piper who's going to be like, follow me. If you're not sure where to put your money, just put your money where I put my money. If I make, put all eggs in one basket. It is a type of ESG, but it's led by profit motives and guided by the chief, the investor in chief, the CEO of America Inc. That's what he is. And I don't think that is necessarily that bad, because it is about, what do you want? The Nancy Pelosi system, where you've got insider trading effectively, like she's running regulatory, she knows what's happening, and then she invests and makes money independently, and is actually putting money in companies that are often conglomerates and who have, not peace and prosperity necessarily as their first point, priority. Do you want that system, or do you want a system which is more like a VC system, where the president has a stake in the system? He actually has a stake. It would be different if he was investing in Chinese stocks whilst talking up America first, right? That I would disagree with, and I'd say that would be a terrible grift. However,
it's almost like,
if the incentives are aligned, it's like a CEO who buys stock in his own company.
It seems like with the most salient the most salient difference between the Trumpian alternative and the system that we currently have, or that we had, is that it's effectively peeling. It's not like Trump is a great guy, or he's necessarily much better than Nancy Pelosi, but it's peeling away a layer of deception and hypocrisy that the Nancy Pelosi types had by being Congress people, secretly doing whatever they do to have these incredible stock picks, right? Saying one thing and doing another. Whereas Trump says a thing and does a thing. And it reminds me of this really interesting statistic I've been talking about recently. I'm not good with numbers, so I actually don't know the specific statistic, but it's about Federer, and about how in all of the tennis games that he played, he only won something like 52, 53% of all the points he's ever played. But it was that 3% that made him one of the best tennis players of all time. And so we don't, for Trump to fix the economy, we don't need Trump to be a good guy. We just need him to be 3% better than what came before. And
Yeah, I mean, I
maybe
like
that
that
could be.
thinking. And look, I'm not saying he's perfect. I just think, and absolutely not. Like, I'm neutral. This is the whole point. The point and purpose of the Blind Spot as an enterprise and as a journalistic outfit is to try and neutralize when the commentariat goes too much in one direction, when they're so convinced of their own narrative they completely overlook the blind spots. That is the name of this is what we do, the blind spot. So it's our purpose in life. It would be negligent of us not to try and look at the other perspective. Are we missing something here? What is the Steelman case for the Trumpian, perspective? Why are they so dead sure? So I don't want people to sort of, because I often go, oh, you're a Trump apologist. I'm not a Trump apologist. If it was the other way around, if everyone was like, cheering on Trump and there was only a couple of critics, I would be on the critics' side. So I just want to emphasize that this is the purpose of what we're talking about. And I have actually gone and taken some effort to understand their thinking. So that's the general outlook here, is that we are reframing the economy. We're trying to make it a new economy that will be much more proximity based, decentralized, and allow the revival of an American Mittelstand. In the context of tariffs, like one of the things we're hearing in Europe now is whether or not there will be retaliation, right? And whether or not they will slap charges on the services that the America still has a surplus on, like, so the big techs effectively and the banks. And the irony here is, I personally, and I don't have any sourcing for this is just my opinion, sorry, just reading the comments. So this is just my opinion, but I think that would be really ineffective, because I don't think Trump is bothered. I think he's quite happy. The lobbyists, the American lobbyists, and the big tech lobbyists, and the bank lobbyists will absolutely have a paddy. But look at the whole Elon Musk relationship. Like, he's totally shredded Elon Musk's market value. He doesn't care. That's the thing. He doesn't care. These billionaires, he was like, oh, everyone was going, oh, he's gonna do things for these billionaires. He's done the exact opposite. He's shredding their, look what he's doing. He's completely collapsing their stock price. This is more akin to what Putin did when he reined in the oligarchs, and he said, right, you can be oligarchs, you can have a bit of, we'll let you keep some wealth, but we're gonna, you've taken the piss for too long. We're now gonna rein it in, and here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna have this big shitstorm. You're just gonna have to weather it. But the purpose is ultimately to create common prosperity for all, and you're either in on the plan or you're an enemy of the state, and then we'll come after you. And that is what the deal, I suspect, was. And so people who think he's grifting with the oligarchs, I think this has been a complete misreading of what happened with that. But yes, when you look at the response from Europe, if they clip the big techs, they'll just be doing Trump a favor because actually he wants competition. He thinks, I think, that one of the problems in the world is that these big techs have got too much monopoly control. And why hasn't Europe created any competitors that can be as big as Google? Why? It should do, because actually that's how you keep the system honest. The reason those guys have so much power and weight in Washington is because they've taken over the world. And it's about time Europe steps up and creates its own champion. So I don't think I think that is that is hilariously something that he would be quite happy about. And again, remember, it's about creating a value-led trading bloc. He's making a common market that is gated with these tariffs. And if you comply with the new vision, the new WTO, because the old WTO was rubbish, had no capacity to discipline anybody who was breaking the rules, right? So it was almost pointless. This new system is going to be more like the EU. He is, a federation, but one where the values are determined by the Constitution of America, right? The founding father promises, rather than the Human Rights Bill. But that is ultimately what he's doing. And you can either opt in and be part of that club, and then you get free trade, total free trade. And that's why the exception on Canada and Mexico is there, because the promise is, he has to have a sweetener. Like, you see, you join our club, you get free trade, or you don't, and you suffer tariffs, and the tariffs will be dynamic. As I said, people are laughing about like this like population-less island that has also been tariffed. I think it's called Heard and McDonald. In the middle of like somewhere off the coast of Australia, I think.
Australia,
yeah. But there is also logic to that. What that is Trump sending a signal that these tariffs have no loopholes, right? That is the point of putting that up there. It's like a token example of like, we have not left a single corner of the globe unchecked. Even this tiny little like island that could be used to like divert shipments through, we've clocked that one, so don't even think about it. So it's more about signaling. And I think the people who criticize Trump forget that everything is performative. It is all about performative. And I've said for
he's
a while,
a showman.
He's a showman. And like Doge is a classic anti-corruption drive, which, whilst we have been moaning about, is actually highly, highly popular with the MAGA base. And I've said before, it is akin to what Xi has done in China, when he had to fight off internal faction wars to get to power. Once he got to power, what did he do? He did a controlled explosion of the what he perceived to be excess wealth, and then he also did an anti-corruption drive to purge his enemies, and also to effectively rid the system of corruption. The difference is they're using similar tools. It's a mirror of each other, but one is the objective is to push forward a free market, free world model, and the other one is interventionist and industrial policy led. However, chances are these market forces will overcome, and in the long run, both sides will become more and more like each other anyway.
Well, that actually leans into one of the questions that was put in the chat, which is, will Europe or the UK end up increasing tariffs on China? I guess the implication there is the system going to be replicated by the rest of the world?
Well, it's going to take a while. It's probably going to be like 2-3. I mean, things are these days with AI and algorithmic, based manufacturing, as things can move really quickly. So who knows? Like, it'll probably take 2 or 3 years, but that's why they've had to rush all this stuff as quickly as possible. But it's all a prelude to the Mar-a-Lago Accord, which again has, I think, been misdiagnosed. Everyone has projected this idea that it's all about a new weak dollar pact, and I don't think that's it. It is there is no like determined view of what Mar-a-Lago will be. It is like the tariffs are engineered to get people to the table to negotiate a new grand bargain for the world, because there are two pathways. We can either fight it out and have a terrible war and everyone loses, or we can have a peace deal where we reframe the economy, figure out how to pay off each other's legacy debts as we allow the new kind of automated systems to take control, because the new determinants will be things like areas of natural beauty and weather, and there has to be some sort of negotiated strategy over who gets what, and what energy quotas and pollution you're allowed to do, and all that sort of stuff. And America will want a fair deal, and so will China, and everyone is entitled to be in that conversation. And it's about creating not a dollar standard per se. I think actually I don't think it's about wiping out the dollar. I think it's more about creating a new ecosystem where actually we do get rid of the banks a bit. I mean, someone was asking about Bitcoin. I do think Bitcoin and crypto play a big part in this whole new system, not least because stable coins will be the key pathway for financing areas outside of the control of sovereign states, and all the sort of offshore stuff will be done on a fully collateralized euro-dollar basis. So it's going to be like the emergence of a new international euro-dollar, but this time it's not going to be funded by endless deficits. It will be backed by US treasuries, but it's going to be more like a full reserve system, and only what is really needed to fund international trade and commerce. And everything, so these stable coins will also be risk on. So like what you see with Tether right now, they're becoming a major kind of funder of trade finance, and they're using their own profit to do that, and that profit is derived from the interest they make when capital and liquidity and balance of payments are misaligned. You have to take this is when rate arbitrage comes about, and you get higher interest rates. So those are the times that the stable coins will make a lot of money, because effectively they benefit when interest rates are high, and then in a weird way they create natural counter-cyclical buffers. So when rates are high, they're making money, but then those profits can be set aside, and when interest rates go down, those counter-cyclical buffers get like effectively reduced, because then the stable coins have to be funded through their reserves, and it's those reserves that get wound down, and eventually they can take a bit more risk because the economy can handle it at that point in the cycle. So the business cycle will be determined by these new types of forces operating in the high seas, and then there will be onshore stable coins, and of course crypto coins will become much more focused on utility and actual investing in real world assets and tokenization. So I do think this is all going to happen, and Bitcoin will simply be the anchor by which all these systems can understand their relative value. And I do think Bitcoin is going to become the end, like it'll be the core sort of, it will be a dollar-based commercial system, but the settlement currency between all these systems that keeps it honest will be Bitcoin, because you can't manipulate it.
There's another I think question that's good to comment on, for you to comment on, which is Marky Sharky about do you think this initiative is coming just from the Trump administration or a change in thinking by the US deep state? I obviously that question passes to you, but it's quite clear that we're seeing a split in the so-called deep state, right? There is a deep state that's Atlanticist and that was always interested in a shared European and American vision, and one that is purely based in the United States, or at least that's how I see
it. So I think like the term deep state is kind of like itself a bit ambiguous. So it depends what you mean. Like if you mean like the civil bureaucracy, the civil service in the UK, or like the kind of bureaucrats who hang about, I think they're different to say the other element of the deep state, which is what I would say are the entrenched sort of military industrial complex interests.
Yes.
So I don't, I just don't know anymore. Like for me, I think as it stands, somebody very smart once told me that, when systems are in great change and revolution, which is what is happening here, the old systems go a bit mad. And I think this is what's happening, is that the old powers that be, the old industrial complex that was very much benefited from the sort of secret industrial policy that the US was always engaging in and giving preferential treatment to certain incumbents, and this began, like, it started off really well and there was great innovation under DARPA, but actually it started to suppress innovation when it was crowding out new competitors, right? So I think they go a bit mad and they go protectionist because uh, they don't see a kind of demand for their services anymore. Like, peace is terrible for, like, turkeys don't vote for Christmas and generals don't vote for peace. Now what you want is a peacetime security system, but sometimes I do wonder whether, as there's going to be a chaotic period, so we do need security in the interim as all these things get figured out. But I do think the longer term pathway is more towards, like the collapse of Rome, where you have decentralization and more kind of localized security systems. So the rise of the PMCs, and you see that with Trump. Like, Trump is basically bypassing a lot of government systems and creating their own privatized version of them. So I think rather than like being beholden to them, he's just making them irrelevant, right? That's the purpose of what he's doing.
And
if
that's
they are pissed
exactly
off, of course they're pissed off, because
because it's
nobody
making them
likes to be
irrelevant.
made irrelevant.
It's exactly what happened with Augustus, right? And how he managed to inaugurate the Roman Empire. Wasn't People think that it's about putting down a standard and saying we're now an empire, but actually he never did that. He just privatized things. He privatized Egypt, and that's what started the imperial dynasty, right?
Yeah. I mean, so the question is more like, is it just the Trump administration? I don't know. Like, sometimes I do wonder if it's all super performative on both sides. I think I'm just going to keep it. I'm just going to keep it Occam's razor. I think it is a Trump-led strategy, and I do, not maybe by him, but the people around him. But I am open to the idea that the deep state itself is divided and there are factions, and I think the factions. This is, to me, as a poll, this is exactly what happened in the collapse of communism. There were hardliners who were like, we'll never give up on our core ideology. And then there were the moderates, then there were the intelligentsia, and then there were the kind of ship jumpers who saw the tide turning and were like, oh, well, actually, we chose the wrong side. We'll flip now. The latecomers, so to speak. And then also there's the point that after the regime change, there were the kind of ongoing leftover commies who then remasked as like pro-capital people, but actually didn't really change. And so this is, again, and there's a lot of that kind of bleeds into the power or prison dynamic, but that's for another time. Any other specific questions about tariffs?
Just riffing off your last comment, which is that Occam's razor, Trump represents one of two guiding interests in American domestic and foreign policy, which is that slant between isolationism or a deep connection to the outer world. And even though we are used to, in our lifetimes since the First World War, for America to take responsibility for the world, for most of its history, America has been much more closely following what Trump seems to be trying to do now. So that does make it seem like it's a long-term strategy
I think
change.
that's right, and I think that's kind of why this is coming now. It's like, and that's what you see that reflected in the tariffs, and how even the allies are 10%, right? Because the idea here is that even our trusted allies who are supposed to be on the same page as us have kind of lost their way, and we need to bring them back into the free world. That's how they're thinking, and I call this mutual liberation syndrome. So this is, again, I think the blind spot in terms of the analysis is that everyone, like the intelligentsia pundit complex, kind of assumes they're on the ideological and moral correct path, and they see, they're convinced that Trump and co are the fascists, and they have a duty to liberate the people oppressed by Trump, even though the people are are more than happy to vote for him, right? So that on the other side, the Trumpian lot, they believe, we in
Hmm.
Europe are under the thumb of these terrible authoritarians. So it's mutual liberation theory. Both sides think that they're liberating the other side from
Hmm.
oppression.
Yeah.
And that is an ideological thing. So how you get around that is the question.
Hmm.
And that is to do with cultural norms. And but there's also a sort of scenario here where, I've said this before as well, where I think we started at the beginning saying like it's like they've swapped masks, in the sense that the Democrats are now much more conservative and the Republicans are more liberal
Hmm.
in some ways, in terms of free speech and things like
Hmm.
that. So there are these paradoxes, not
Hmm.
paradoxes, but ironies
Yeah.
emerging as a result of that.
And it wouldn't be the first time that the Republicans and the Democrats switched places, right? Because the
Yeah,
Democrats used to be the party of the South, the Republicans the party of the North.
yeah, exactly. But it's, again, I'll reiterate what we said at the beginning, because I've got more viewers now. Is that the difference is that the Democrats are the ones, when you look at their track record, they flip-flopped a lot on their positions. Like, they're not the party they were 30 years ago in terms of what they stand for. But
Hmm.
when you look at Trump, and I'm not talking about the Republicans, I'm talking about Trump himself. For someone who's, has the reputation of a madman that you can't predict, he's been incredibly consistent his entire life. Like I said,
Yeah.
he's written like 20, 30 books written, where he's pretty much said the same thing.
Yeah.
So
And that's something so crucial to what you're saying, which is he, you said it before, when I asked, do you think he's going to hold his nerve? Because, regardless of what Trump's strategy tries to do, it only really works if he holds his nerve. And like you were saying, he's been consistent about this. Been his most consistent point, and his team is filled with bullbusters and people with a really long track record of being dead on, and contrary to what the mainstream believe, right?
yeah,
So
and you can't, like, he's been through so much. Like, you think he's gonna, like, let, I don't know. I think these are strong-willed people with a
yeah,
lot of conviction in their beliefs, and I don't think they're gonna bend. I think this is
yeah,
the difference.
yeah,
They are, you know, Truss was weak. Truss did bend.
mm,
She did fold.
yeah, yeah.
Also, the
And this
system
isn't like
in the UK,
yeah,
didn't really allow for her to defy
mm,
the
mm,
forces of her own party.
yeah,
But Trump, apart from being impeached, is basically untouchable.
mm,
So you know, he can't really be impeached for causing a stock market collapse. Like, that isn't
mm,
something that you can do. So it'll be
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And it's not something that is on the sidelines of Trumpian ideology. This is the number one thing he's always parroted, which is tariffs. And if
Yeah,
you look
and
at
I
any old
think,
interviews, like
he
you're
said it
saying,
in his press conference in the Rose Garden. He says, "Oh, the globalists are going to all moan, and blah blah blah. Just ignore them." Like,
mm,
and this is the last point I think that's worth making, which is, I tweeted this, is that whilst we're kind of freaking out, the average man on the street, they get it. They're like, I don't understand. Like, they've been ripping us off for ages, and Trump is just doing what's fair. Why isn't it? That's, if you listen to talk radio, the average man on the street totally gets it.
mm,
And his approval rating may have fallen, of course, because the middle, the flip floppers will maybe have been having second thoughts, but
well,
the
it's
core
scary.
base, I don't
Yeah,
think the
but
core
it's
base is, the
mm,
base is, it's a cult. Like, don't forget,
yeah, yeah,
he has
yeah,
created a cult,
mm,
and this is more like a ideological thing than it is a political thing. So it is about, free world, and it is but it's a benign cult, in the sense that it's opt-in, and it's like you come in and you radicalize yourself to be
mm,
a Trump supporter. But
mm,
it's in this, the key is that, well, one hopes at least that you don't go all Nazi on things. So I mean, this
Yeah,
is the
that's what I was
great
gonna
thing.
say. Yeah,
The
that's a big
cults, the
risk.
cult side of it is, more like a I mean, all cults. The question is, do we create cults all the time? Like the left has its own cults as well. Like we have the
Bitcoin
Green
is the cult.
cult and whatever. So
Mm,
cults are just natural occurring phenomena. It's
mhm.
just that we can see them in other people more easily than we can see the cults, and so there's not. I think it's all kind of subjective at that point. Um,
Yeah,
the Nazi factor is the thing to be wary of, and I agree.
yeah,
But I don't
and
really
people,
personally see.
yeah, and people using
I
like the fact that Trump is in charge, to excuse overreach by federal governmental agencies. Like we're seeing celebration of random detentions at the border. Like we should
Yeah,
never
I mean,
celebrate,
and that is
administrative
going too
overreach.
far. And
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like, so that goes back to your Federer point. He's not perfect, and somebody has to. We have to have someone whispering in his ear, "You're not God.
Mm.
You're not
Yeah.
God."
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Memento mori.
remember.
Yeah.
So, but I do think, for sure there is that risk because he is human.
Mm,
But at the moment, whilst he's fixated with trying to prove his tariff point, I think
mm,
there's no risk of
yeah.
labor camps. If anything,
Mm.
it's the opposite. If anything, I
Yeah.
think this will have the effect of liberating the labor camps in China because it's going to force,
Mm,
like, it's going to force welfare onto China, which will help the Chinese go up the wealth middle, escape
yeah.
the middle income trap.
Yeah. They'll
And
stop
that
repressing
that
their
takes
workers,
out
like you're
poor
saying.
people from sweatshops.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
really, that's the fundamental thing. Like, if this was a like why, according to based on pure like economic theory, China should not still be the exporter of cheap labor. It makes no sense. They should have, like, the whole point is you rebalance. As you get wealthier, you consume more
Mm,
because you've made all this trade, and then you have to pay your workers more, and when you pay your workers more, they become less cost effective to employ in supply chains. So
mhm,
then you have to find other poorer people, and then you go on and on and on until everybody gets rich. But that has not happened. Those poor people have persisted. Now, I'm not saying China hasn't achieved great success. It has, don't get me wrong, it has lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and for a lot of people, working in a factory is still better than slaving away in a crop field and having uncertainty of food source and all that. Don't get me wrong, it is true, but it has come at the cost of stealing a lot of people's wealth and parking it in industrial kind of bets that are determined by the government, not by market forces. And that's great if the government gets the right choice. If it decides, well, this sector is going to be the one we're going to support, and
mm,
by by fluke, it's the one that creates fusion or something really important. That's great. But if they get it wrong, all their eggs are in one basket, and that is the problem. It's not a resilient system.
mm,
um and I guess, and the pro China people, and I'm agnostic. I think, I'm not anti. I think China has achieved amazing things. The point is that um that what confuses everyone is that China is both very authoritarian and super hyper competitive. At the sharp end of the economy, you have absolutely no regulation. You have complete dog eat dog world. It's like Shark Tank every day. So when they decide to support a sector, they throw, all the like subsidies at it, and then let people battle it out. It's like complete blood sport. And then there's only one left standing, and then that becomes the national champion. But it's like a weird competitive blood sport where they allow all these poor people to, like,
mm,
come, it's brutal. It's a brutal
mm,
capitalist. It's in some ways the most brutal kind of Victorian age capitalism you've ever seen. But on
mm,
the other hand, they completely repress sectors that they've decided are not for them.
mm,
And so there's never any opportunity. If you want to, like, develop a business that is out of favor, you'll never be able to do it as a result.
mm.
So So that's the thing that I think confuses people, and that's why yes, they can create the best EVs, and they've managed to do it in like an in a tiny amount of time in relative terms, but it hasn't just emerged out of organic processes. It's been a
Mhm.
strategic choice that has compromised other allocation elsewhere, or it's disguised other inputs, or the subsidies have like skewed how efficient the cars really are. And that's not to say the technology isn't great. Technology that got us to the moon was great, but it was not necessarily sustainable. So those that's slightly different.
Mhm.
S&P futures just dropped 2% as China announced reciprocal tariff. Right, so we're in the world of reciprocal tariffs now. So that is not too much of a surprise. I think we were expecting something, but 2% versus whatever it was that they what was it? It's about 40% that they've slapped on China, right?
Mhm.
Um, the that just shows you they don't have that much power. They've definitely not matched it. Um, and I think in some ways, like I said, America isn't too bothered because a lot of the services that they export to China are not really their core interest. It's the sort of
Yeah.
stuff, like I said. So, like, the same as with Europe. If Europe reciprocates by taxing the big techs or the banks, that kind of is doing Trump's ultimate vision a favor because he
Yeah.
wants to cut out the middlemen.
Yeah. Just announced, yeah, 9 minutes ago from CNN, China imposes 34% tariffs on imports of U.S. goods.
Yeah, I think working closely with Chinese colleagues is brutally competitive. Absolutely, it is hyper competitive. It is exactly the opposite of Europe in
Europeans.
many ways,
Yeah.
apart from Germany. But Germany is what it is because of the Mittelstand.
Mm.
And again,
Or was what
like,
it was.
or at least was what it was.
Mm.
But now, but most of the rest of like Italy basically specializes in inefficiency and competing on how inefficient and ridiculous, excessively luxurious things can be. It'll take me 2 years to make this excessively, expensive and non-sustainable Ferrari, right? Which is totally different
And you're
model,
not allowed to buy it,
and you're not
right?
allowed to
Because
buy
that's their
it. Yeah.
business model. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, false scarcity. So
Yeah.
it is a different system.
Mm.
Anyway, we'll see what I mean. My view is it's going to be in terms of pure sort of market mechanics. It's going to be painful for the next couple, maybe like at least a few weeks, as the system adjusts and we realize where the excess fat is going to go, right? Where is the China's extra output going to go? It doesn't really have anywhere obvious to send it. Like, that was the whole point of the Belt and Road initiative. It was to find new markets for its excess capacity. But that didn't work because they were doing effectively vendor financing in their own currency, and the vendor financing doesn't work if the people you're giving the goods to aren't good for it and then default. And the hedge there was that they would de facto acquire that territory and have more and more influence over those zones, which is what's happened. And that's fine. And a lot of countries in the Belt and Road Complex or in Africa are quite happy to be subjugated by China. And if they think they're better overseers than the Americans, then that's fine. That's what China brings to the table. Like, maybe a lot of people prefer a protectionist environment, but America brings the free world, like for the creatives and for the people who have autonomy, who want autonomy and want to take risk and want to be responsible for their futures. That's the West system. And it's like a brain. Like, I've always thought of it like the brain, like the Chinese Confucian kind of spirit versus the kind of create, which is more like the
Left
orderly
brain
part
now.
of the brain, which
Yeah.
which deals with
Or right brain.
what's I'm not a
Like
brain scientist.
maths, logic, technical, like
Math log,
yeah,
very kind of
yeah.
like autistic Spock brain, versus the more creative, like ADHD brain, where
Yeah.
like parallel processing and all sorts of crazy stuff is, we're psychedelics, we're
Yeah.
doing whatever that is America and the West, and the two
Mm.
are actually complementary, which is why I don't think we should. This is what Mar-a-Lago Accord is about. It's about showing up what our strengths can be, and it's not saying, "Oh, China, you have to be like us." We get it. You want to be like that, and there's a place for you, but within our systems, occasionally our guys are going to produce people who feel more comfortable in your system. We're going to have to allow for that movement of labor, because we're the creatives. We're the kind of we want that freedom, and they're trying to oppress us. So can we, and you'll occasionally have people who are more inclined to be in the creative camp, so let's do a kind of talent swap. It's fine, because that's and so over time we have a natural inclination to create these cells that will sit in these complementary compartments, rather than having a war where we just end up destroying capital and value and death
Mm.
and disaster, right? So
Mm.
it's about creating a symbiosis, and that is what Mar-a-Lago Accord is about. It's about bringing people to the table to hash out the new system and how it should be operated and on what standard. I think we've done
really
our
good.
job. You've got to go.
Mm.
Trump's tariffs have 2, 3, 4 years of runway, not a repeat of Liz Truss. Yeah, but I also think, last point is that don't forget, I think they are going to be dynamic. That is, they're up for negotiation. This is art of the deal. Art of the deal is you start high and you are, remember, it's reciprocal kind. So there's an element of, you can appeal, you can, he's making an initial offer, and then let's negotiate our way to an equilibrium that's going to allow for the transition to happen. And that transition is, okay, we don't want too much shock therapy, but we've sent the message, and we are now repatriating, and we're going to build the American Mittelstand. And if Europe's smart, it will expand the Mittelstand concept to everywhere in Europe, not just Germany. And that
makes sense.
I think we finish on that, but thanks for joining us. And remember, the blind spot is not about endorsing any particular way. It is just about pushing back against groupthink and presenting the other perspective, because we believe when something is crowded out, it's always worth looking at the other perspective. That's what
the blind spot.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.